And good morning to you. I'm Joel Forde and welcome to Forde Co. In this program, we're looking to remove, reduce and reintroduce. Today is budget day. We're expecting to go live to the House of Parliament at 3 p.m. But today is budget day, as I said before, and it's the first one since the country's move to republic status. The last budget presentation was nearly 3 years ago. It was 2019 on March 20th. And at that time, the Prime Minister was asking the country to stay the course, the arc of stabilization, growth and transformation. And it has not been smooth sailing, as in that period, the country has been hit by a pandemic, a freak storm, the ash fall, the hurricane, and most of that was in 2021. So what will today's budget bring? My guest, Derek Cummins, he's the president of BIBA and CEO of Amicorp Bank and Trust. Dr. George Brathwaite, a political scientist and lecturer at the UWI Cave Hill campus. Professor Justin Robinson, lecturer in financial management at UWI Cave Hill, and Devron Bruce, a political scientist. And I'm expecting to be joined by David Simpson, a chartered accountant, a little later in the program. So we're going to take a quick break. When we come back, we talk budget, what's in and what's out. Stay with us. And welcome back. Now, today our topic is remove, reduce, and reintroduce. We're doing a preview of today's budget, which will take place at 3 p.m. this afternoon and will be delivered by Prime Minister the Honourable Mia Amor-Motley. Now, even though we didn't have a budget presentation, Parliament was prorogued in August of 2020, and a new throne speech to give the government a new mandate. This was after the COVID pandemic was presented to the country in September of 2020. So let's step back and come forward. Some of the elements of the 2019 budget were intended to stabilize the economy and to transform it. And transformation has been the key buzzword of this administration. It's where we met the BERT program that was meant to start us on this path of transformation. So how did we do? I'm going to start with Professor Justin Robinson, a lecturer in financial management at UWI Cave Hill. Professor Robinson, how did we do coming out of the 2019 budget?
Well, clearly the government has been able to achieve very little of the objectives set out in the 2019 budget, because shortly after that, we would have really been hit by the COVID-19 pandemic. So those plans, which were passed into law and had immediate effect in terms of the income tax and the various proposals, so they were implemented. But in terms of their effect in terms of any transformation. They will really have hit a complete brick wall with the COVID 19 pandemic really affecting Barbados from around March 2020. So many of those objectives could not have been achieved. The policy had to adjust immediately to really deal with a stark new reality that we had never faced before.
Derek, one of the few industries that still remained relatively stable during the pandemic has been international business. So let's talk about that. How was international business impacted, if at all, by the pandemic? And what are you seeing in terms of the measures that were put in place for the 2019 budget, and did they affect the industry at all?
Thank you, Joel. Good morning and congrats on your show. Definitely, international business sector remained robust during the pandemic, with little impact on the businesses, on employment, and on revenues. Also, we were able to continue to add significant dollars to the tax revenues of government. What I would say though is, imagine going into the pandemic the way we were in 2017, 2018, with all our debt payments on that current trajectory, without refinancing our debt, without refinancing the economy. So I would want to say that there was a lot of success in the 2019 budget. I heard Dr. Robinson, but at the macro level, had the government not did the heavy restructuring that they did, I don't know how we would have survived a pandemic that is in its second, third year now. So the next thing that happened at the end of 2018, along with working with BIBA and our professionals, government was able to redo and rewrite about 21 legislations. Some were repealed and some were new, some were adjusted and amended. That really, this was based on pressure from the OECD and the EU, etc. But it set us up, gave us the level of compliance, the level of transparency, and allowed us to operate in the international business sector. Without these changes having been made, our sector would have been crippled severely, almost as severely as many other industries in the Caribbean, in the jurisdiction. So what I would want to say is that there was that success on the legislative aspect in getting Barbados and the international business sector on a good footing. The macroeconomic story that we could tell from 2019 onward about the stability of Barbados entering into the joint program with the IMF and restructuring our debt was a story that we could tell to investors, that we could tell to our international clients. So on that macroeconomic level, there was a strong measure of success. We continue to hit the BERT targets again and again, even the recent ones. So I would want to say that the government did a lot in ensuring that the platform on which international business can thrive, and the businesses, the practitioners did a whole lot of work in maintaining their clients, in maintaining the business, in maintaining employment, and maintaining revenues for government during this period.
Thank you very much, Derek. I'm going to come to Dr. George Brathwaite. Derek mentioned something interesting. He talked about the amount of legislation that was put in place to allow Barbados to be able to compete on an even footing, and we're still under the thumb of the OECD. But we also saw our foreign exchange reserves go up significantly. They were approximately 400 million at the lowest point, and they went up to 1.1 billion, and this was as at March 19th, 2019, and they were expecting to reach 15 weeks of import cover. So is that still the even keel on which we're on, and that was not affected by the pandemic? Although there are those who will say that the government has borrowed a lot of money to shore up those foreign exchange reserves.
It is an interesting question you're posing. To start off, and to agree with Derek, that the legislative changes really gave us some grounding. particularly as you know, we were blacklisted. Mr. Toppin at that time, who was the minister, he made it his business to demonstrate to the OECD that what in fact was being done was undermining the competence, confidence, and projections in terms of the Barbados government and other small jurisdictions. So we did well in keeping our business going and keeping things afloat. Indeed, that is directly linked to our capacity then to earn for foreign exchange, notwithstanding the borrowings. The fact that we were able to uh, still capitalize on markets that were now reopening in terms of foreign earnings. So I think it was a matter of a balancing act that the government played well, but they recognized that they had to fix things like compliance and adjust to the requirements needed under the OECD and other large, powerful entities that we have no doubt but to work alongside and work with. So, yeah, it's an interesting question, and one would have to perhaps this evening, wait until this evening, to see once we have the legislative structure in place, uh, what it means now for us moving forward and further capitalizing. Because don't forget, we lost a lot in the Canadian market at one stage. So there's still a lot of room for maneuverability and to be able to re-attract several of these foreign entities, and certainly in terms of helping the larger macroeconomic program.
Devon, still talking about the 2019 budget. There were some goodies in there. The personal income tax refunds for 2011 to 2016. Persons received $1,000 in cash. That affected at least 63,000 households. Our national debt fell from 170% of GDP down to 125 and is expected to drop to below 100% in 7 years. We saw setup of education and retraining for the people who lost their jobs, especially as we headed into COVID. So we saw a lot of that. How was that? Was the government able to keep at least those promises once we started to deal with the pandemic?
Thank you, Joel, and greetings to your audience and congratulations on your show as well. I would agree with you to some extent that government has been able to keep some of those promises, and it's really in line with what Derek was saying regarding the debt restructuring and the ability of government to really find that fiscal space for the next couple of years to really do some of the things that may be necessary. Because the debt restructuring, I think we were really supposed to return or repay some of our debt going forward, I think in 2025 going forward. So it gave you some bigger room so we can do the retraining that you mentioned, so we can give some of the goodies that you mentioned in 2019 budget. But let's not reckon, we also need to recognize as well that in 2019 that mini budget also had quite a bit of austerity attached, because you had a surplus that the IMF dictated at a 6%. And obviously, it was reduced because of COVID, where you could run a 1% deficit. But let's not forget the fact that you had tax increases. You were taxing your exports. For instance, you had the tourism sector, our main export, that received quite a bit of taxation in 2019. So taxes on flights, taxes on hotels, taxes on Airbnb. I think the VAT increase for the
And taxes on
sector.
e-commerce as well. Remember, if you buy a book off Amazon, you don't have to pay taxes on it.
Yes, certainly. And you had those tax revenue generators, in essence, coming on board that allowed government to do some of the things that it was doing to its benefit. So you had, for instance, the increase in the energy tax, which would have been the road tax converted into an energy tax. And then you had the sewage and levies and those various things as well. So those were some of the things as well that government used or utilized to give some of the goodies that we mentioned, so to speak. So for me, it was a mixed bag. I think that really, to the government's benefit, that debt restructuring was one of the key and major benefits going forward. But at the same time, there were other aspects as well that had implications that were negative for average people. So it was a mixed bag, I would say.
bag. There were goodies you gave with one hand and took back with another, but there were some other elements within the throne speech of 2020 in which the then Governor General spoke about looking at things like renewable energy and medicinal cannabis, and one of the economic policies at the time was to transform Barbados and its citizens into a smart nation and a full-fledged innovative economy through a maximization of world-class technologies. Now that all sounds very good, but as recently as this past week, we saw how government IT services were hit by ransomware or some kind of issue, and it now has to be redone and strengthened and made more secure. So how are we talking innovative technologies and digitization of the government service in some elements when we can't seem to even be able to manage to secure our IT services? And I know that Derek will tell me, but even major firms are having issues in keeping their IT services secure. So let's talk about that.
Security is a living being. There are people, you probably got out of bed this morning at 4:30 to do this job. I got out of bed this morning at 4:45 to do my job at my car. There are people who don't sleep and they wake up every morning to find ways to cripple IT infrastructures for individuals, corporates, and also for governments. So it is a living being, and you have to evolve and learn every day. So you know what? I will not penalize, put a heavy fault on the government's IT infrastructure and the personnel for having suffered some measure of attack. It seemed to me that they got it under control very quickly, and most importantly for me, they were very transparent about it. Um, that for me was critical. So yes, we do have to go this way. We want to see a time where kids are going to school and sitting in front of computers 100%. You know, where they're learning to code from a very get go, very young age. Where adults are also reinventing themselves to learn these technologies. But we live in a world where the more we do this, the more the greater risks we are opening ourselves to. And now these risks come from anywhere in the world, to threaten what we are trying to build. But we do have to continue on that process of being a leader and a IT efficient and effective society, whereby it makes no sense continuing in the old ways where new, faster, more efficient technologies are being created. We have to evolve. We have never to be. We always talk about Kodak. That is the poster child for not evolving as a country, as corporates, as individuals. We have to change the way we do business and the technologies, um, the smarter ways of doing things, the sustainable ways of doing things, the greener ways of doing business. Everything has to come into play.
Thank you very much, Derek. I'm going to come back to you, Devron, because we were talking about medicinal cannabis was also within that budget, and looking at producing value-added products and setting up licenses, etc. Do you happen to know how far we've gotten with that? I really thought we would be at a more advanced stage by now.
Well, regarding that aspect, I can't particularly say how far we've gotten. I know that we have a head of the department, and you've had some investors and interested investors coming in over the last couple of years. I'm not sure what impact COVID has had on that circumstance. I know also there was some disagreement regarding the legislation and, in essence, how it, in essence, ring fence a certain type of investor and left other investors and potential investors out given the cost. And that may be one of the considerations they may be rethinking or reworking, but I'm not sure how far in they are regarding that aspect. Regarding the situation on technology, no, if you look at the Ministry of Science, Innovation and Technology, the current estimates do not provide significantly more for that ministry than the previous one. So when we're talking about cyber attacks and really bring our society to a more technologically driven society, we have to put money behind it. and it does not seem as though it's a real priority, because I always say a priority of government is always found in how much money it's going to put behind that priority. And I don't think it's been a significant increase in that ministry that can really buttress some of the things that may be necessary going forward. So I would say that's one of the cautions as well we have to think about, that Ministry of Science, Innovation and Technology, and really begin to put some money behind it to fortify what is necessary going forward. So that's it. That's what I would add regarding these two aspects.
One of the things they also talked about was Wi-Fi and broadband being made available to all citizens, and especially those in housing estates and rural areas. So what you just said was interesting in terms of this year's estimates, not seeing a big lot of money being put in order to be able to widen those services, because we all know that during the pandemic, how many children had serious challenges because they either didn't have Wi-Fi access, or they didn't have devices in order to allow them to study online, or maybe there weren't enough devices in the home to allow them to do online classes. So we know that that's going to be an issue. Let's continue to talk about the terms of technical services, because there's talk about making Barbados making Barbados a smart nation and a full-fledged innovative economy through the maximization of world-class technologies. You work in this world, Derek. What are some of the things that could be implemented that would certainly bring us to a place where we are, if not on par with, at least not far behind the rest of the digital world?
Yeah. So again, I go back to the children. The years that we've lost in not having coding at the very beginning of schools, we need to catch up. I know the university is doing a lot of stuff to train the coming generations. As far as technology goes, we have to continue on the push. We were so excited a couple of years ago about the not just the crypto, but blockchain and use of blockchain. And also the central bank and the FSC jointly has a sandbox. And this technological sandbox is where innovators play and create and make new things under the supervision or in lockstep with the regulator. What happens normally is that corporate or the world develops new investments and new strategies, and the regulator is often playing catch up. There's a risk in that. The second option is the regulator may over-regulate, get ahead of industries and over-regulate, and thereby stymie the innovation of professionals. What the sandbox allow was for that lockstep, hand in hand, to innovate while the regulator is seeing every step and finding the best ways to mitigate the risk to the population. We need to get that going. We need to get that working, make a safe innovators to come to Barbados, knowing that they can come here, they can IP their products here, they can create here, and with a space that is not, with a right size regulatory framework. So that is one thing. So we ought not to shy away from bringing innovators to our shores. When we do that, they also then need competent staff here in their companies to help them build out their businesses. So our immigration stance has to continue to be one of welcoming creators, welcoming investors, and in so doing, they develop employment at a highly local level. They train, there's a transfer of technology, a transfer of knowledge. So those are the things we want to see. So one of the things that I want to say today, everybody will have their hands out, obviously, for the government in the basket. But what I want to see is a continued institutional strengthening within government departments that set the platform upon which all of our industries operate.
All right.
This is simple.
Thank you, Derek. Professor Robinson, I'm going to come to you now, because one of the things that Derek talked about is having this digital sandbox and being able to invite innovators to come to Barbados. I noticed that for energy, we're having a green energy park I am not seeing anything about an innovation park or innovation hubs. I was in Amsterdam a few years ago, and one of the things I found interesting that they had all these different hubs. So there was a sports hub where different sports were being developed and training and different things were happening. And then there was a technology hub, and there was a cultural hub. So there were hubs in different places that allowed different people in different sectors to develop and improve and strengthen their craft. Should we be having an innovation hub that would allow us then to not only have innovators come, but be also able to look at different and newer technologies, etc., etc.?
Okay, so again, before I comment on that, just back to the earlier discussion, in terms of timelines, you know, a lot of the debt restructuring, a lot of that's really came out in 2018. So in terms of my earlier comment, I mean, a lot of that macro stuff was really laid out in that 2018 and came out of the IMF program. I mean, in terms of the innovation, the technology, Derek made the point in terms of coding and teaching. And one of the points, I think I want to make 2 points there. One of our challenges in this whole technology, digital space is really the teaching of mathematics from an early level. At the university, one of our main challenges in terms of the whole science, technology, innovation space is the relatively small number of persons who really can matriculate into our science faculty. Because coming out of this, at the primary school level, the children seem to do slightly better on mathematics than English. But when you get into our secondary school system, by the time you get up to a level of math, you've really lost. A lot of children don't have that competency. And going on to the A level mathematics is really a tiny fraction in our society. So if we are going to drive innovation and that digital, particularly in that digital type of space, technological space, you know, there's no world-class coding if you are not competent and comfortable at a certain level in mathematics. So I would like to see a tremendous focus on the teaching of mathematics throughout our school system, that we have a significant number of persons coming out. A critical mass then. So you have some good people, but you need a critical mass. In the short term, we are likely to have to import these persons. So I agree with that immigration stance to bring in, but we don't have that critical mass, and a lot of it goes back to that, what I almost call a math phobia in our society, where there isn't a lot of comfort with math. Secondly, you know, transformation, institutional change. I think one of the realities of something like that, if you study it, is that those things take time. You know, you pass legislation, you put in framework and so on. But any institutional level led change is a process, and is really a process and building up to a critical mass. So with measures like that, I tend not to expect near to medium. I tend not to expect near term results. And in terms of innovation hubs, I think a critical mass is really what you need. Rather, sometimes I fear what we end up doing is we end up having a lot of one and two woman and men shops that really can't impact. So it's really to mass our resources around some critical high impact areas. So, and a green energy park can serve as a catalyst for an innovation hub. So I tend to prefer in a small space that you sort of don't do the kitchen sink approach. You kind of identify what are the game changers? What are the game changers? Where do we have competencies? Where do we have some skills? And really focus your resources there. Have some quick wins, have some victories there, hold, and then move on, rather than being all things to all men.
Understood. Professor Robinson, thank you. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on Forde Co, where our pre-budget discussion, we remove, reduce, and reintroduce. Stay with us. And welcome back to Forde Co, a special program where we're looking to preview the budget that will be delivered this evening at 3 p.m. by the Prime Minister, Mia Amor Motley. I want to reintroduce our guest once again, Derek Cummins, the President of BIBA and CEO of Amicor Bank and Trust, Dr. George Brathwaite, a political scientist and lecturer at UWI Cave Hill campus, Professor Justin Robinson, also a lecturer in financial management at UE, Devron Bruce, a political scientist, and joining us is Mr. David Simpson, a chartered accountant. Welcome, Mr. Simpson. Nice to have you on board. Now, I want to we started, Mr. Simpson, you would have missed the first part of the conversation where we started by looking back at the 2019 budget and what were some of the things presented in it and whether or not the government managed to accomplish any of it because of the challenges that the country has had. The pandemic, we've also had the climate issues in terms of the hurricane and the electric storm, and then of course we had the ashfall. So those would have hampered government's ability to implement a lot of the things that they talked about, not only in the 2019 budget, but then we had a throne speech in 2020 which gave government the opportunity to refresh its mandate and come again in order to deal with the pandemic, and then we had the 2022 president's speech. I want to look forward now to what we can expect from this evening's budget. The private sector is asking for an ease. Barbadians are asking for an ease. Everybody wants ease. How much wiggle room does government really have? Just as I think we were expecting to ease back out in and open up the country and look for robust growth. Even the international agencies, the IMF, the World Bank, etc., were predicting double-digit growth for Barbados. And now there's the war between Ukraine and Russia, which is going to significantly set back a lot of what we hope would have been gains for the country this year. So how much wiggle room does the government really have?
I often say, Joel, that there's not much wiggle room, especially where we are impacted by so many external factors. Looking forward to the budget, though, I would say that for me, a couple of the principal things, and I think the little bit that I heard before I joined addressed some of it. But I think in the context of rising fuel prices, the war, I think some of the requests of the private sector should be high on the government's priority. One would be pushing forward the renewable energy agenda. And I think this is in terms of both residential and commercial. And a significant part there is for government to be able to provide incentives and concessions so that the average Barbadian plus businesses can employ the renewable energy to reduce costs in their operations costs in their households in terms of electric consumption. One of the other things I would want to see would be policies that will allow us to develop business, whether small, medium, or large enterprise, to a point where we can significantly export services and products. We've always prided ourselves on being a country that possesses a qualified workforce, but I don't think we've been able to see that transformation in terms of getting maximum benefit in terms of the contribution to foreign exchange earnings. So I'm hoping that those two areas for sure, coupled with changes to the education system. Professor Robinson, I think, touched on the whole issue of technology and innovation, but the STEM and the STEAM approach to education and reforming our educational process, I think, should also be high on the agenda. But in terms of wiggle room, we are now trying to recover from the impact of COVID. Tourism, from what I heard last week, is showing some rebound. International business remains strong. So it is for the commercial and other activities, construction and so on, entertainment industry and so on, to start to catch itself again. So there's limited wiggle room, I would say, but I believe government is still seeking to raise revenue while stabilizing the economy. And of course, all of us will be looking for some type of relief in terms of the cost of living. And I think that may be where government may tend to have the least wiggle room.
Mr. Simpson, Dr. Brathwaite, you heard what David said about STEM and STEAM and those kind of initiatives, but those are down the road. Those are not initiatives that are going to are they going to produce any short-term fruit. So we're looking at quick wins in a budget. I want that when I go to the gas station effective midnight tonight, the cost of gas come down a little bit. I want when I go to the supermarket and I spend $200 that all the things ain't coming in one bag. So what are some of the quick wins that government can give us in this budget?
I understand what you've said. I understand what David has said. Uh, but I am not sure that this is a moment for the quick fixes.
And
Uh, in terms of the incentives, going to be the incentives and concessions that David spoke about, it will be consistent with government's own pronouncements in terms of empowering and enhancing and ensuring that a greater segment of the Barbadian population has the opportunities to capitalize on it. Uh, so, for instance, we know that taxation is not going to bring about the type of growth that we need. So, what I think you're going to see when it comes to the ease of not only running a business, but the ease of starting a business, um, getting the type of financing where you can start entrepreneurial projects, and this so aligned with industries such as agriculture, where we're pushing big on food, the food nutrition and food security, etc. And in conjunction also with the construction projects, I see these as the immediate things while we put in place the types of other structures and other policy frameworks that will encourage the private sector real activity in terms of local and regional, brings in the CSME back into play again. The extent to which we're going to really maximize. We've seen how we've been able to cooperate in terms of public health and the pandemic. We've now come out of a summit in Belize where we're hearing in terms of food security, how it will lessen the import bill, how we know that we can even attack or the impact of non-communicable diseases on our country and economies. So I think when you start looking at this in a more holistic way, seriously in terms of transformation and the digitalizing of so many different things, I see some things can immediately have impact in terms of the incentives and concessions, and at the same point in time, I see it as a progressive and upward outreach, wherein then you start looking at the, the the capacity to export, as as mentioned again by David, the capacity to streamline at the primary and secondary levels your output in terms of education and the type of students. And I see all of that as part of the bigger picture that is part of a process. But the immediate thing is you're not going to increase taxation, you're going to provide incentives and concessions, and at the same point in time, you recognize that inflation is there, it is rising, but what you have to do is to be nimble. Nimble rather than being draconian or punishing. So I think it is a balance. I think the Prime Minister, one thing she does, she has the tendency to listen to her constituents, whether in business or in households. And I think with the discourse that you've been hearing, particularly in the last 2 3 weeks, and certainly after the war started, I think that we are going to see some innovative tinkering in terms of keep gas and oil, gas and diesel to the minimums. The minimums may still be expensive comparing Barbados with other Caribbean countries, but I think you will see something and some innovative mechanisms being put into place there, and that is only to ensure that there's production across the board in Barbados.
Davron, over the weekend, the chairman of the Private Sector Association, Tricia Tannis, she noted that their agency had sent some proposals to the PM, and she added that the issue of the cost of living had to be addressed with urgency in order to put more disposable income in the pockets of Barbadians. She said that the environment must be one of nurturing economic growth. So what can government do? And this is including some of the things that George just talked about in terms of nurturing growth of businesses?
Yes, I'm in general agreement with George in what he presented thus far, but we're acting as if government does not have money. Government is projected to spend $3.7 billion and running a $500 million deficit. The money has to go towards something. And I would think that it should go towards medium-term relief, instant relief, and long-term growth and investment. So one of the areas that I think we really need to take a look at is the fact that the agricultural sector, we import most of what we eat. And we know that the cost of freight, the cost of grain, and the cost of energy is increasing internationally, and therefore our agricultural product, therefore, will increase internationally. How then do we utilize our domestic agricultural sector to really limit some of that cost that may be hitting us internationally? How do we use our local manufacturing sector to burden, or rather, protect us from some of that burden? And what we have to do then is relieve our local manufacturing sector from their own burdens. So the cost of energy, the cost of water, the cost of transport, those are some of the concessions that we'd like to see attached towards the upcoming budget for the agricultural sector. And this fuel tax, for instance, we know that fuel is one of the things that hits so many aspects of our economy: transport, storage, anybody who moves, anybody who travels, anybody in boating, anybody in the cutting of grass. That hits so many aspects of our society, and we're getting what, $61 million from the fuel tax, according to the last Sectoral Bank report, for instance. But yet, I think it has such a dampening impact on economic growth. So, quite frankly, I think that is something that has to be looked at as well too, removing that fuel tax or reducing that fuel tax, because the burden is so broad and the impact is so broad as well.
Devron, let me stop
And
you there. If government
mm,
takes out, let's say they took out half of that 60 something $1 million, which is the fuel tax, they have to make it up somewhere. They already have a deficit. They have to make it up somewhere. So if they're going to ease you, they're going to give you with one hand and take it back with the other. So if they're going to ease you one place on gas, you know that money is coming from somewhere else.
they can make it up by they can make it up by economic growth. So in essence, if you have a tax that is hitting so many aspects of your economy and only for $61 million, I would certainly project that if you have or remove that, the economic growth that you will have going forward, if it's removed, can certainly make up that $61 million. Let's say, for instance, instead of you spending your money at the gas station, you go into the supermarket and spend it, let's say, and the government's revenue returns via VAT, for instance, or government revenue returns via some other aspect. But I don't think that the impact of the tax is worth it. And I think it, quite frankly, should be removed or at least reduced, because I think it just has too strong of an impact on our economic growth, and it's growth that we need to attract taxes. And we've learned that from the Ornata administration. It's really growth that helps you to raise further taxes going forward. So I would think the fuel tax has to be removed. Regarding the budget, again, one of the things that George mentioned is the entrepreneurship aspect. You have the international business ministry, and under this budget, they only received $12 million more than the last one. So, interestingly enough, we're talking about entrepreneurship, we're talking about small business, but yet we're not putting money behind where these things actually have to go. So, instead of having a situation where you're spending God knows how much on unemployment benefits and other social services, maybe we need to start growing our economy, investing in agriculture, investing in entrepreneurship, so people can begin to take care of themselves, so people can begin to feed themselves, and then they can be less reliant on some of these, services, so to speak, particularly unemployment. So I think we need to put our money where our mouth is and really begin to grow our economy going forward. And I think that really helps with much of what we need for the future.
Thank you very much, Devron. We're going to take a break, but just a quick reminder, you can join in the conversation. You can call us at 228-5562 or 228-5563, or you can also comment on our social media pages if you want to join Forde Co. We'll be back in just a moment. and welcome back to Forde Co, where we preview today's budget presentation that's coming live at 3 p.m. Tourism is the breadwinner of the country. There's no getting away from it. And for years, we've talked about diversifying our exports and diversifying services and finding other ways of earning revenue that are less dependent on tourism, which is subject to all of the shocks of external shocks. What are some of the other sectors that need urgent attention? I'm going to come to you, Professor Robinson.
Okay, but you can't come to me on that and not let me comment on some of that.
Absolutely, absolutely.
You can't treat me so. You know, my late grandfather from Chimborazo, St. Joseph, used to say that the urgent takes priority over the important. And I think this budget is so difficult, interesting, because there are a lot of stuff that are important and urgent. And I think it's important to keep in mind where this process is starting from at this point. The economic stability that Derek spoke so glowingly about, Barbados' economic strategy is grounded in us getting to a debt to GDP ratio of 60% by 2033. That is the overarching metric that guides everything. Right now, we are standing, the debt to GDP is about 144%. We were thrown badly off track in the last 2 years, and this was supposed to be a get back on track year. When we look at the estimates that were laid and passed, the government has a deficit of $867 million, 3.3% of GDP. That is not consistent with our economic strategy and story. So I was expecting a budget, because it's difficult for me to imagine that the government would actually go and seek to complete the financial year with a deficit of 3.3%, requiring us to borrow about $867 million, considering that we borrowed $869 million the year before and $686 million the prior year. So so it's difficult for me to see how the finance minister avoids austerity measures that closes that gap if we don't want to risk undermining the credibility of the economic reform that the government started in 2018 and was doing so well on up to 2019. So I don't actually expect, as you say, Joel, that they give with one hand and take with the other. I expect the government to seek to take from some people or some groups to begin to close that gap. Because I think that is one of the urgent and important factors in the room. Can we maintain the economic strategy if we have a deficit of 3.3%? And we have to, or are we going to try to close that gap? And I expect measures to try and close that gap.
Professor Robinson, over the weekend, I want to go here a little bit. Over the weekend, you said in one of our weekend papers that you do not envy the Minister of Finance as she approaches this budget, because she faces a set of economic circumstances that are worse than those faced by any previous administration, and the budget must be understood in this context. The government is faced with the challenge of protecting the vulnerable, stimulating economic growth, and closing the deficit in the context of a global economy about to relapse, just as it was starting to recover from the ravages of the COVID-19 pandemic. And all of that while we're still in an IMF program. So I'm no economist, but when I hear that, in my head, I'm thinking more taxes, which is always difficult in a contracted economy, because I'm not sure where else we're getting this money from to, as you say, close the deficit that you just spoke of.
Oh, so that's why I say it's so difficult, because that was a problem before this war broke out. So you had that very difficult issue as how are we going to close that gap if we are to stay on the path and maintain the credibility, because that's very important for financial markets. Mm-hmm. When you set out a stance and say, this is where I'm going, this is my KPI, to use a corporate term, this is my key performance indicator, I put it out there. I'm going to be assessed. The credibility of my management will be assessed on my ability to meet those targets.
But
So you
don't those
start.
international agencies take on board the challenges that Barbados has had? And those challenges, while some are unique to Barbados, the ashfall, the hurricane, others are global. We're not the only ones dealing with the pandemic. We're not the only ones who are going to be dealing with the high costs that come out of this fallout between Russia and Ukraine. So isn't that taken in context as well, that Barbados is not alone in dealing with these issues?
Yes, of course. So
Or are we judged differently?
no, we're not judged differently, and that has been taken into account, and we were allowed to not meet some of the IMF targets. So I'm saying the PM, the Prime Minister had that challenge before the war in Russia. What the war in Russia now has pushed up commodity prices. So you have another urgent problem where there are groups that need relief. Now, in some ways, the government is going to get a windfall from this rising commodity prices. So because of the way the VAT and these formulas work, it will collect more than it had budgeted from some of these taxes. Now, how much of that windfall do they want to keep to close their gap? And how much are they going to offer some relief? I think the pencils and the spreadsheets are out working that out. So I expect some moderation in the increase. Or and along with that, you have relief targeted to particular groups. So are there particular businesses? Are there particular groups of society that are going to be more impacted than others and therefore will get bumped up the priority list for relief? But that relief, I think, has to be funded by giving up something somewhere else. Because I don't know if we can really go with a 3.3% deficit and maintain the credibility and really borrow another 800 million this year on top of the amount last year and the prior year. So I think it really has to be understood within that context that some very difficult choices are going to have to be made. So I think there's going to be quite a mixed bag that is probably not going to quite please anybody.
Thank you, Professor Robinson. I'm going to come to the rest of my panel to get their comments as well. David, you have joined us new, so I'm coming back to you. Yeah, David is a new boy on the block, so I'm going to come back to him.
David always gets preferential treatment from the ladies. I don't know
why. Why you so? David, your thoughts on what's possible given what Professor Robinson has just said?
I mean, Joel, thanks. I fully agree with Professor Robinson, and that's why I spoke to items that were more medium term. I think for me, it's a simple formula for government, as challenging as it is. Government needs revenue to survive, whether it is to close that deficit gap that Professor Robinson spoke of, or to spend on the operations and management of the country. In the short term, they can only gain that revenue through taxes, fees, and levies, and so on. And that's why I said that, I mean, in addition to any short-term taxation that may be there, and it may be in the form of the continuation of the fuel tax or whatever without any relief. But I think we have to turn our attention to the medium to long term that will allow us to reduce over time that dependence on high tax revenues. And it comes from production and productivity in terms of innovation in existing businesses to allow them to be able to transform themselves into entities that can export and earn more revenue, easily remove all the challenges of doing business in Barbados, because when they thrive, then government will get revenues in terms of corporation tax and VAT and so on quite easily without the need to, as somebody was saying, take it from one place and have to put it on somewhere else. Now, while those things and the development of industries like agriculture, renewable energy, technology, medicinal marijuana, and so on, maybe in the medium to long term, steps need to be taken now so that we can unlock the potential and the advantage of those things. So I find it difficult, and I agree with Professor Robinson that the Prime Minister and Minister of Finance has a challenging job. And to me, the win-win, so to speak, is to place some additional hardship on one category of person and give relief to others. But in the context of the global scenario, I really don't see government making any significant inroads into reducing the price of fuel, especially if they want to try attacking the impact of freight on imports and so on. And we are in a situation where we don't have a lot of resources, physical or other, to leverage, and we need to focus on leveraging our human resource in terms of services and how we deploy technologies into, say, renewable energy, agriculture, and those type of things. So it's hard for me to sit and say that the PM will do X or Y because of the challenges that she will face. But I agree with Professor Robinson that that deficit, in the context also of the requirements of the IMF in the program that we're currently in, I think will constrain and direct how much relief she can give, where she gives that relief.
And
And
for how
I'm
long?
certain,
Because she may give the relief for a period of
right,
time. For how long?
correct. And a lot of what she does, I believe, as well, will be based on how tourism really rebounds. I'm monitoring what the tourism officials are saying and observing what I'm seeing on the ground as well. And there has been an uptick for sure, even based on activity as I move
Mm-hmm.
around and so on. But we have to see what that translates to in terms of dollars and cents, and understand that we're now at March and our traditional season ends mid-April to end April. So, what are the prospects for the crop over season with a modified crop over, as they have said? So there are a lot of things in the bag, I believe, and it will be quite interesting to see how she leverages those to give relief where relief is much needed, but also to kind of right the ship and keep it on a stable course going forward.
Thank you, David. We're now going to go to our phone lines. We have our first caller for the morning. Good morning. Welcome to Forde Co. Oh dear, the person is gone. But we'll get back to them. One of the questions I was asking also is, we know that tourism is the breadwinner. So in any stimulus packages, they're going to get the lion's share. What are some of the other industries and some of the other sectors that need urgent attention? The entertainers have been crying out for the longest time. They've even, once we start to roll back some of the COVID protocols, they've been asking for dates for crop over. We're not going into stakeholder meetings about crop over when Trinidad and Grenada had put out their dates ages ago. So does the entertainment sector need some kind of stimulus and boost to help them get back on track? George.
I think the entertainment industry will get it in a soft massage as opposed to getting any financial input. Uh, I think the sectors that you may find take priority would definitely be agriculture, and as it relates to energy, green economy, and utilization of the blue economy. I think you're going to see some emphasis there because those are the things that, one, can bring some quick money into the economy, and at the same point in time reduce things like imports. So I think that is going to be one of the areas that um, there'll be some emphasis. Although, and I wanted to make this point earlier, although you are seeing the government project or putting in less money in those areas in terms of capital expenditure, the reality is that uh, there appears to be a stronger marketing effort coming emerging from the government and some of the voices I'm hearing in relation to getting the local private sector to make investments in speaking to the households and people in terms of the whole home ownership program and utilize it to feed into the grid, etc. So I'm seeing that type of emphasis where some of the money that will go into pushing these industries are not necessarily coming from government, but government regulating and putting the accompanying and supporting mechanisms in place. So I think that, and that is something that I know that I heard it mentioned certainly by Devron. I know indirectly Professor mentioned it, and it puts the government in that sticky position. But if there's one thing that I learned from Owen Arthur and watching him and in discussions with him, he always said that in these small open economies, uh, the draft is always coming in. And if the draft is always coming in, you have to be nimble. So I think we're going to hear a budget this evening, and it would not surprise me by hearing that we have the same prime minister coming back to the people of Barbados, depending on how things are working out, because that is the pragmatism of the situation. You have to really deal with it frontally, but it is difficult.
Thank you very much, George. We're going to take another break. When we come back, more on Forde Co. We're looking at the pre-budget discussion: remove, reduce, and reintroduce. Don't go away. And welcome back to Forde Co. If you've just joined us today, we're looking at the budget that's due to come this evening live at 3. We are doing a preview, so to speak, as what we can expect in the budget. My guest, Derek Cummins, President of BIBA and the CEO of Amicorp Bank and Trust. Dr. George Brathwaite, a political scientist and lecturer at UWI. Also Professor Justin Robinson, a lecturer in financial management at UWI. Devron Bruce, a political scientist, and David Simpson, a chartered accountant. Now, gentlemen, one of the things I want to look at is the whole thing about the war between Ukraine and Russia. The estimates were laid in February, and by late February, this war had broken out, and that is going to have a significant impact on us here in the region, even though there are some Barbadians that seem to think that they live here and it will not affect them. So let's at least do a preview of that. How do we think that is going to turn out, and how do we think that will impact not just Barbados but the region, because we don't live in this region alone? I'm going to start with you, Derek, because you move in international circles.
Thanks, Joel. No, you're absolutely right. So this last election was won on January 19th on a manifesto that anticipated an eventual easing of the global shipping logistics crisis. It anticipated maybe a gradual leveling of oil prices, but it certainly did not anticipate that we would be on the brink of a possible world war, and that being the war in Ukraine and Russia. So a lot has changed since then, and people were very excited about a lot of the promises made in the manifesto. For me, it will be interesting to see government's ability to yet target many of these promises. We know one of the major ones that everybody was happy about was the reduction in land taxes to zero for homeowners, 400,000 and less. We know back in 2019 there was an increase in land taxes for those above that, and that level remained the same. So now that the plan was to reduce the ability to do this now, and we have to go back to debt. Debt management is number one. Again, we were at 170% debt to GDP in 2017. 2019, we were about 125%, targeting 100% in 2025. And as Justin reminded us, 2033 down to 60%. Obviously, that was all appended by COVID. The reality is now we need to manage our debt, and we don't want to manage debt by borrowing any further. We need to manage debt by growth. We need to grow our economy out of the situation that we are in. We are now though in a position where if we weren't sure before, we know that yet the artery of this world, the arteries of our lifestyle is not just the money, it's oil and fuel. And even though we have a target of being green by 2030, we are not making movements towards that. One thing I want to see is the impact in this budget to the duties on electric vehicles, for instance. So what has happened is that this crisis has is directly impacting the artery, the blood that runs through the arteries of our economy. Oil, fuel, everything is yet dependent on this. So everything has changed for the government. And as Justin said, you wouldn't want to be the Minister of Finance right now because you have to grow, but you have to stem inflation. How do you stem inflation as a government? You retract your economy. You slow the movement of money. You put a damper on credit. You raise interest rates so there's less credit, so people can borrow less. So there's less activity. But we cannot afford to do that now in the instant where we need to be firing on all cylinders: tourism, agriculture, manufacturing, international business, international business. Um, so it is a tough situation for the government now, and this war ends everything. It's a total rethink as well.
Yes, we did. We saw recently, I think within the last couple of years, where government has insisted that there now be a new national minimum wage. And at the time, we were still within COVID, and a lot of business houses said that that was going to significantly increase their costs. Now we have this minimum wage. Persons who were getting it were even saying it wasn't even enough to keep body and soul together. Then what happens now? Because the price of everything now is going to go up. So our business houses going to come back to government and say, look, we can't do the minimum wage. Let's take it back a little bit. And when things get better, let's go back to the minimum wage. Your thoughts, Deborah?
Well, regarding the minimum wage situation, I don't think that's something that we should take a step back on at all, quite frankly. I do see how the cost impacts on overall business, but again, this is why growth is important. If you have a situation where you're what they call economic declining and you're making money off of less and less, then quite frankly, everybody's going to be negatively impacted. So that's why we need to head in the direction of growth. And I think we all agree on the panel that that is what the economy needs, particularly given the fact that you've lost 20% almost of your GDP in 2020. So I think, and then you had the last 10 years where the economy was not growing at all, really. I believe the 2017 or rather 2007 economy is larger than the one we have now. So you can imagine where the Barbados economy is. So it has to be a long-term investment. Be, be as small territories continue to govern against the wall. Every crisis that occurs, everything that happens, there's always an excuse not to do what is necessary. So in the last 10 years, it was the Royal Recession, then it was Brexit, then it was the pandemic, now it's this war, and there's always an excuse not to do what is necessary. At some point, we're going to have to do what is necessary to ensure that we have the level of protection that is necessary. And I think that the energy sector is one of those areas, and agriculture are one of those areas that we have a relative control over. So we have land, have we have the sun, so we can provide ourselves with energy. Those are two things that we can really focus on, and we need to have focus. We continue to see fire on all cylinders. I understand diversification and understand the need to fire on all cylinders, but I think we also need to have a focus. Over the last 10 years, we've heard about green economy, blue economy, orange economy, digital economy. We're hearing of my economy, and it just seems not to be any real focus and any real growth and development in any of them. So I would say pick one or two of them, ensure that we solidify those for the next 10, 15 years, and then move forward, as opposed to what we've been doing for the last 15, 20 years almost, governing against a wall and not making the necessary investments going forward that would really put us on a path to long-term sustainability and development, as opposed to what we currently have right now, endless crises.
Professor Robinson, your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, as I'm listening, I mean, I think I kind of want to use a medical analogy. You get up out of bed and you want to go and run a marathon and fire on all cylinders, but then you get hit by a bus. you really have to forget running that marathon. It's really so. I think the priority in Barbados right now is stabilizing the economy because there's the crisis which has one set of impacts, but then you also have the policy response, and the policy response can make it worse. And if the policy response is one that is meant, well, I'm trying to get somebody who just got hit by a bus to run a marathon. Let me patch him up and keep him running and so on, not knowing all the internal damage. And I think that's counterproductive. The economy is very weak after COVID. The global economy from which we extract our growth is about to go back into recession. So I think we have to focus on stability. So for example, we're talking about government spending. Winston Cox used to always say to me, putting something in the estimates to spend money on doesn't guarantee that you're going to get the money to do that spend. These are estimates. So when I look at these estimates of the amount of money government is planning to spend, there's a huge item in there for $250 million, which they have under the 276 million under the category of other, which means the government does not yet know where it is going to get that money. So I think we are facing a serious crisis, and the priority needs to be the stabilization of the public finances, the stabilization of the economy, and any targeted relief we can give to our most vulnerable groups. You really have to play the wicket that you get. You would like to go out and play shots, but if this track is keeping low and the ball is, then survival becomes the key. So I think we have to be very, very careful how we approach this.
One of the biggest expenses for government is always salaries. And while these are rough times and we don't want anybody to be on the breadline, is that even on the back burner? Sending home people, reducing salaries in any way? Because that's always a consideration. Even if you throw it out as not politically expedient, is it something that we can put out there on the table? David?
I don't know. Listening to everybody speak, what my vision for what I see. I mean, and I think Professor Robinson and Devron touched on it just now. Tourism is not going to go anywhere. Just to go back for a minute, and you mentioned the industries that need attention, and agriculture, renewable energy would be my two for sure. Supported by that technological push in terms of processes in government and in private sector, but also it must be central in education, as I think Mr. Cummins spoke of in terms of coding and that type of thing. But I think we can't look at them in silos either. We need to look at where they will all intersect. So, for example, if we can develop agriculture to a point that it can provide more and more of the inputs for tourism, renewable energy can reduce the cost of operation, especially for hotel plans and restaurants and so on. And technology can be employed in more areas, not to the exclusion of the human resource, but to the more effective deployment of the human resource. Then I think that is the formula that we are looking for. So with that as the basis, I think that addresses the production / productivity issue that I raised earlier. And I think that's where our focus needs to be. I think it was Devron who was saying we seem to pick a few areas every year, but we never seem to focus in and zero in and be able to extract maximum benefit. And I think now is the time, and diversification is a medium-term thing. And that's why I said earlier, if we don't take the steps now in the short term, because I know you're asking about short-term relief a lot, I think we also have to consider what the future relief is going to be in the medium term by leveraging all of these areas that we've mentioned.
Thank you very much, David. How can government start to look at some of the inefficiencies in just the overall structures of government? Because if we have deficits, we have to find the money from somewhere. So when I'm looking at my own personal budget, I look for the places to tighten and to trim back that I don't necessarily need. So if me and the girls is hang every Saturday, then I need to cut back down to at least 2 Saturdays out before in the month, because clearly we can't lime every Saturday if money tight. So where are some of the inefficiencies that government can start to look at to tighten up? Dr. Brathwaite.
Yeah, I think this you're pointing to an area that started the whole notion of the public service restructuring that we saw come on stream after May 2018, and certainly uh, we recognize that there was a fair amount of duplication in terms of ministries and then the statutory boards, etc. And I think you're going to find more and more uh, because Miss Motley, by now, and certainly she has said it, and several of the other Caribbean governments have realized it, that discipline is really the order of the day for the type of government in these countries, particularly with the pressures being down on them. So you're going to see an elimination because it helps them to improve your ease of doing business. You're going to start seeing, you're not going to be seeing 3 and 4 ministries trying to attend to the same provision of public services. And again, we live in a parliamentary republic, uh, and I believe in the voice of the people. And the voice of the people keep on suggesting to me that notwithstanding any tinkering or any arrangements in terms of the public service, the delivery of public services still need to be reworked because there's too much wastage there. So I think, for instance, like with water and these areas, you're going to see a lot more addressing, they pointed their addressing of some of these issues where wastage took place. So it's not just the physical resources, but it's the financial resources and most definitely wastage in terms of human resources. Sometimes we get comfortable in the particular positions we hold. And I don't want to see anyone unemployed because I've been through some of that in my life and it has been painful. But what you want to be able to do is to reshape, redirect, where people's talents can become useful as a contribution to the growth of the Barbados economy. We need it now, as David and the others were saying, in terms of survivability and certainly in terms of sustainability and our development. And if we are going to look to transform, it can't be just be in transforming and beautification of Barbados. It has to be a lot more. It has to be attitudinal. It has to come down in terms of the very values and norms that we want to inculcate for future generations. So I really think that this budget this evening will give an important signal to the whole notion of the smart transformation and utilization of technologies, talent, human resources. I think you're going to see a cut across, but it is not one that I think that will give you all the answers, but it will point a direction, and that is important.
Thank you very much, George. We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, more on Forde Co. Stay with us. Welcome back to Ford Co. Now I'm going to step off the economics and step into the politics. This is going to be definitely a budget presentation like no other, simply because we have no opposition. So whereas before we're used to the presentation on one day, the reply the next day, and then the debates going down the road, there's no opposition. So I'm going to step to my political scientists and ask them their thoughts on how they think this budget will play out in public opinion. Devron, starting with you.
Well, interestingly enough, since 2018, we've not really had much of an opposition to begin with. We've had a single individual in Joseph Atherley who could have replied to the budget. So I think we found ourselves in a position nationally where the opposition is really among people and various groups in our society. So we have various segments and interest groups in our society that will begin to really dissect the budget and really begin to hold government accountable. We have various political parties, we have the unions, we have civil society, we just have average people, social media. So there's definitely going to be a response. There's definitely going to be input, and I don't think you need a parliamentary opposition to have a robust discussion and a robust democracy among a society when it comes to these fiscal and budgetary measures. So I don't think you need to have a person in parliament to really respond. It's certainly a good thing because you can have far more accountability and a fine tooth comb, so to speak, going through the estimates, particularly a strong budget. So I don't think there's going to be any significant impact regarding that. But if I can step back really quickly on, I know we're talking the politics, but the economic aspect of it, you mentioned some of the savings that government has to address. And I think one of the things we have to think about, it's not very popular, but it's the diplomatic missions in Barbados. We have almost 20 overseas missions at this point. Now, we understand the need to globalize a society, but I think that's what CARICOM really should have come together and begin to do. I don't think that an individual territory like Barbados needs almost 20 overseas missions. And then you have, for instance, as well as legislative policy, you mentioned unemployment. We don't need to send home anyone in government. We simply need to rethink how our government workers operate. So you have legislation that limits them from interacting with other jobs, for instance, because they're a government employee. And yet we're pushing entrepreneurship, and yet 30,000 employees are not allowed to have another job because they're a government employee. We have to rethink those things when it comes to flexi working time, flexi management systems that allow individuals, as George pointed towards, utilizing their talents and using their talents to really help grow the economy through entrepreneurship. And then there are issues such as procurement and the cost of doing business and those various things. So I really wanted to get that part in there because we always think of cutting, and not really reforming and refashioning what we do. So some of those are some of the things that I think we should add towards it. But ultimately, to your question, I don't think there's going to be any major problem given the fact there's no active opposition in the parliament.
Thank you, Devron, for that. That has always a bugbear of mine, that in any talk about refashioning, we talk about cutting first and we don't talk about reinventing. And you're right, there's a level of guilt that operates in the civil service about people who may be doing a little thing on the side, and that if you don't tell your boss and your boss sees you doing it, then it's a whole thing with you and the general orders and letters to your file, etc. Whereas you're really stopping these people from legitimately having some kind of side hustle that will only help to grow the economy. So thank you for that. Dr. Brathwaite, I'm going to come to you. Same question that I gave to Devron. We have no opposition. So how do you think this will impact the presentation of the budget and the reply to it? Or are we just expecting social media and Barbados Underground to do the reply?
In my last segment, I mentioned the fact that Barbados is now a parliamentary republic. And out of the essence of a parliamentary republic is the voice of the people and the expectations of the people. The people become the greatest check and balance on any government. They're better than any opposition. They are more forceful. They will get things done that need to be done. And I say that in the context that there's some soft things that we need to be calling for and be more challenging for. And one is the type of information that comes to the public. So we need to get that type of legislation finalized. Because transparency and accountability, Derek mentioned it in his first statement this morning when he was speaking in terms of the cyber attack and the hacking, etc., and the fact that the government was quite transparent. That is something we want to see all the time. Indeed, the Prime Minister has announced a chief of staff in the Prime Minister's office. I would like to see the public utility of that chief of staff, wherein each week, even not discounting for the secrecy of cabinet, I think there are some major decisions that are impactful to the populace that need to be aired and ventilated on a weekly or certainly a bi-weekly basis emerging from the cabinet. So I think that is one area that a chief of staff could adequately be
But Dr. Bradford, we
utilized.
saw that a little while ago when David Thompson was Prime Minister. He started these Thursday press conferences after cabinet. It didn't last very long, but it was very informative. It at least gave you a sense of what was being worked upon, what were some of the issues, what were possible decisions being under consideration, even if the decision had not been taken. And it certainly made you feel that as a member of the electorate, you were a little more informed, and then that seemed to have died with him. So are you suggesting that this chief of staff should have their own, even if it's through the public affairs department, their own session where they identify some of the issues that cabinet is looking
Yeah, but
at?
I would think that that is the link between the governing and the governing. And what it does, it enhances the level of trust between the governor and the governing. What it also does, it fills that gap. It limits the type of speculation we have and the fear we have emerging from cabinet and from government and with people being left out and those included, etc. And what it also brings me to is this whole notion of we have and Dr. Professor Robinson could speak even more to this, but we are living in an era wherein the people's expectations matter in terms of governance and public management of resources, particularly your financial resources. And at a time when things are so exceptionally difficult for most persons and most businesses, now is the time that you demonstrate that good faith and that trust that you have a 30 love mandate. And so that your opposition now, your real opposition in Barbados to me would be the broadening of what you said would transpire. You said there will be a broadening of the social partnership, but let the social partnership really be clearly in the eyes of the people. As Devron suggested, you have several groups and pressure movements, etc. Civil society, let these people, and that way, it is power from the bottom upwards. It is people having a voice. That more and more young people and other marginalized groups, traditionally marginalized, are now having voice at the table. And I think all these things all go well. Yes, as a government, you're going to get criticism, but you have to face it and fix it. Going after again, and I think we learn a lot from our leaders. I think the current leader is really setting some good patterns, but at the same point in time, there are some gaps that need to be filled, and it is the level of governance, information transfer, accountability, and the transparency that's necessary. And to me, there's no better opposition than the voice of the people.
All right, thank you, Dr. Bradford. Don't forget, you can join on the conversation. You can call us at 467-5562 or sorry, I'm getting confused. 228-5562 or 228-5563. We also have a WhatsApp number, 228-5562, where you can get your comments, leave your comments, or ask your questions. We've not had any callers this morning, so please, we're looking forward to your comments and your questions. The DLP is asking for an ease for the poor. Is this just politics, Devron? They have access to the same information we have, so they must know that there's not a lot of ease to be given for anybody, rich or poor. So is it that they're just playing politics, or they too understand that at this point more than ever we need to be able to protect the most vulnerable?
Well, I don't think it's anything new for any opposition or any political party to pander towards, having relief towards citizens in a budget. It's been something that's been done for generations now. But I think particularly now, we've seen over the last couple of years high inflation, high cost of living, high energy prices, high unemployment. So I think even the BLP certainly would want to ensure that that group is also protected, because the realities are is that the economy has not been able to facilitate that particular grouping very well, and no fault of its own, really, no fault of any Barbadian or any political party. It's the international economy at the same time. So I don't think you're playing politics, because even in Barbados, the party, as I said, we certainly want to bring relief to the more vulnerable within society. So I don't think it's a political thing. I think it's just a practical reality that this is what we're currently faced with in our economy that has not been performing since 2007. So it's been a long, long, hard road for many people.
And the government will say to you that they've been doing the best that they can. We saw the BEST program. We saw that there was still the family mitigation unit and people could sign up and get some assistance. So I think they probably think that they can do the best they can, but in the current state of the economy, there's only so much that they can do. There's only so much to go around. There's no more stretch in the elastic band. Your thoughts?
I don't particularly take that argument. We just had a discussion regarding some of the inefficiencies in government and where more money could be found towards heading in certain directions. And I think there's certainly room for policy development as well too. We've seen government talk about the establishment or heading forward with universal basic income. I'm very curious to see whether or not that is something that would come about in this budget. They also spoke about amalgamating the various social services so that there could be some cost savings going forward. And again, as you mentioned, Joel, in any budget, you have to go through line by line, so to speak, and find where the savings are. So there's certainly money to be found that can certainly help the vulnerable. But again, the growth aspect still has to be the major consideration. And again, we continue to speak about the Arthur administration because I think he has been successfully showing that growing the Barbadian economy by 4 and 5%, and you'll be able to solve some of the problems that we've been having for the last 15 years almost. So it's really about prosperity and growth as opposed to taxes and cuts. And we really need to rethink how we approach these things philosophically going forward. And I think growth begins to solve so many aspects of what we have discussed so far.
Thank you, Devon. Just before we go to break, I'm going to come back to you, Professor Robinson. One of the things that is critical in any economy is confidence. Do you think that the budget is going to renew confidence in the administration and its ability to pilot this ship forward, and also for foreign investors?
Oh, you want a response now after the break?
Let's go to the break. I'll take your response after the break. You're watching
Okay,
Forde Co. We'll be back in just a moment. And we're back. And just before we went to break, I was asking Professor Robinson about confidence in the economy. Is this budget being presented this evening going to project confidence, so not only locally for our business sector so they can start to make more investments, or also for foreign investors? Your thoughts?
Yes, I think that's a very important question. It kind of goes at the heart of some of my comments earlier, where I'm not just talking numbers, but the government would have garnered a lot of confidence going to the IMF in 2018, a swift budget, and really addressing a lot of the imbalances in the Barbados economy, and I would have gone a long way to bringing back confidence. I'm of the opinion that if the government ignores the deficit of the size that is outlined in the estimates, and doesn't seek to correct that deficit to some extent, there is a genuine risk of undermining the confidence in this government's commitment to being fiscally responsible. We've had the pandemic, we've had those hits, people understand, and you give the ease and you expect some reduction in targets. But if our response to crises is to ask for more eases, to continue to borrow and so on, it does run the risk of undermining the government's commitment to being fiscally responsible. And in terms of your comments on the question on the politics earlier, I always think if the politics is extremely important, I mean, with political office comes a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think governments need to be held accountable. I mean, when you offer yourself a political office, you are saying that you have the answers. So the job being difficult, I don't think there's anything for us to feel sorry for anybody about, because people campaign for these jobs. And when things go well under government's watch, they take credit for it, whether it was their doing or not. And I think on the flip side, when things go badly, they get the blame for it. And I think that's just part of the game. So I don't approach this with any sense of pity. I mean, your job is difficult, but you signed up for the job, you campaigned for it, you said you were the best at doing it. And I think people have to be held accountable to really crafting the appropriate policy responses to the shocks that hit. Because I think economies like ours, I'm always of the view that the shocks are going to come. It's only a matter of if or when. And everybody knows, I mean, I'm a big fan of Wayne Arthur and his administration. But we should also keep in context that Wayne Arthur was prime minister during then what was then the longest peacetime expansion in our major trading partners. You have to play the wicket that you get, and we judge you on how well you play that wicket.
Okay, thank you, Professor Robinson. Derek, I'm coming to you because I know that confidence in Barbados is going to raise your business, is going to expand the international business sector. So is it important that this budget projects confidence in the growth of the economy? We've all agreed that what is necessary is growth, more now than ever. So is it important that the budget shows that the government itself has confidence that the economy is going to grow, and therefore foreign investors are going to feed off of that? I think I read over the weekend that Grace Kennedy is saying that what the Barbados government has done in terms of being able to make it easier to invest in Barbados, and they've set aside a certain amount of money to invest in some of our financial sectors and other products here in Barbados as well. So is confidence important in your area?
Thanks, Joel. It absolutely is. It is a major driving force of business, really. Now, domestically, nobody's going to be happy after the end of the day, or completely happy, I should say. So with that, there will be a lot of more emotion, really, than thinking and doing the math and the figures. So that's the case. And that emotion might come out in a lack of confidence over time, more so than actually analyzing what's happening. Now, for confidence, yes, government has to say they have a short-term plan to get the safety net, safety social net, keep it in place, and for a season they may even have to expand it. There are medium-term things that they have to do, but then we want to hear about that medium, yes, and long-term strategy to get capital projects going. We have so many projects that we've been hearing about for 2-3 years. Some have started, one or two, but most have stalled and not going anywhere. We need to make sure that we continue with the institutional strengthening of the agencies that grow Barbados or set the platform. I'm thinking about, say, let's say, Invest Barbados. We need to see the continued resources placed into an agency like Invest Barbados, which is the promoter of Barbados for foreign direct investment. We need to see resources placed in BIBA, which also promotes Barbados as a jurisdiction for doing business and for growing business, for redomiciling business, a jurisdiction that can work. So that's why I said early on, yes, there are all the social matters, everything that everybody needs, but the institutional strengthening, the path that we have been on, I want to see that continue. Strengthening CAIPO, strengthening the Ministry of International Business, continuing to strengthen immigration. And they've done a whole lot of BRA and strengthening the capabilities of BRA. Gotten some real professionals in there. So these things will bring the confidence to those on the outside looking at Barbados as we promote Barbados. We, as the practitioners, we need to, yes, be confident, and we are not spinning Barbados, but we are telling the truth about what we can do and what we promise. We have to be able to deliver. So I want to speak to that. But Joel, please allow me very quickly to go back
Go
to the
ahead.
leakage. A number of things you mentioned, and you mentioned that the leakage, we have to short up. Now, for government, productivity is critical. And I was listening, and you finally touched that taboo term, general orders. Somebody can tell me how old our general orders are?
And if they've ever been revised, yeah.
Until some government has the nerve to tackle the general orders and tackle security of tenure, we will be in the same place that we are today and have been 10 years ago and have been 5 years ago, and on and on and on. All right, I'm with you. No, I'm not speaking about immediate dismissals, etc. But if you want to have a good job, you secure that job by doing excellent work. Okay, so that's the first thing I want to say there. Productivity is key. We have leakage in and leakage out. Leakage in is the failure to collect. The failure from abroad to collect, NIS to collect, water authority to collect, etc. All right, that's leakage in. Leakage out, the procurement practices of the SOEs. Now, I'm not the one who prays and say, oh, consultants. I think the consultants that have been used, many of them have been critical, and I support the use of consultants where it's managed. But for procurement of goods and services, we have to tighten it up with regulation, legislation, and policies across the board. So that is on productivity and leakage. I also want to go back to the politics of having a single party. For me, I think we all are fascinated by the pomp and pageantry of a budget and a debate. And it's so sad that that's lacking. Even though the debates have been, the quality has been on a downward spiral for decades, but still seeing that and hearing that, that is fantastic, and you're going to miss that. But what I will say, as Devron said, um, what is it? Democracy, there are lots of elements, but two are political parties, but then pressure groups. The reality is Barbados have always sidelined and mocked pressure groups. We mock Eric Seeley, we mock men like of David Commission and many others. But this is a time and an opportunity for serious pressure groups to rise up and be the voice, and really take the debate to the people, okay? And the debate to government also. The next thing I'll say on tongue in cheek, Joel, maybe CBC should be given some time to the other parties to have a substantial debate on the budget, etc. So there's a role that CBC has to play also in airing the views of which may be contradictory to what is presented here this evening.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Derek. You're quite right. As a national broadcaster, we should be able to be the platform by which those other views are ventilated. You're not wrong there. I'm going to come back to you, David, because I wanted your thoughts on whether confidence, and you're a chartered accountant, so confidence in the local economy and for business owners to feel that they can grow their business even within the constraints of the economy. How important is that?
So I think it's of maximum importance, Joel. Many decisions, corporate decisions, are taken based on the investors or management's confidence in the economy or the community within which they operate. I think outside of the budget, though, I think one of the major issues in terms of confidence is that whole ease of being able to do business and interact with those government services that I think George spoke of earlier. And I would want to see over a period of time that government really breaks down all of these services and the mechanisms and processes that government uses to make sure that they do provide that level of confidence. The other aspect of confidence can come from the budget, which is government being able to demonstrate that they are in control of the financial situation of the country, the economic environment, and that the decisions they are taking are the best that can be taken considering the circumstances and will be to the benefit of the decisions that they need to take as private investors into this same economy. So I think the two go hand in hand. Government needs to give some confidence in order to engender and encourage that investment into the economy and what that will then represent, which I think as I would leave Professor Robinson to elaborate on. But that investment through confidence, I think, will then allow government to manage its revenue and potentially reduce taxation and levies and so on, because you have investment coming in that's generating other revenues and other economic activity.
Comment coming from our social media pages. I'm going to ask my director to put it up so that we can all see it. Government needs to look at our manufacturing sector. We rely too much on the importation of products. What advice would the panel give for making this sector more attractive and growing? Gentlemen, I believe that we've talked about this a little earlier, but quick, round robin, 30 seconds. Start with you, Devron.
Well, as you mentioned, we did speak about it, and I think energy has been a major concern for the last 30, almost 40 years of the energy sector. And again, the irony is that we live in the Caribbean where it's mostly sun, yet somehow that has not been completely exploited. And I think that we have been talking about it for so long, and yet somehow we've not done enough in that sense. There's also the issue of the wages, but again, that's in the context of larger costs of doing business and the cost of living as well, too. So I think we have to start with energy first and foremost if we're going to be talking about manufacturing and really just getting energy costs down through renewable energies, particularly targeting the sun. So that's what I would say regarding that question, and obviously as well cost of doing business and ease of doing business.
Professor Robinson, quick thoughts.
Yeah, interesting question. And my view is that we should be looking at any opportunities we can find to create local value added. So maybe an example, right? Once we had a budget where we were charging householders, I think $1.50 a day for garbage collection.
Mm-hmm.
It's not coming out of the consolidated fund. I wondered whether we were missing a chance to create some new local small businesses by actually privatizing that waste collection, because consumers, households are now paying for it directly. Why it's no longer through the fund? Do we actually need that to be a state-owned body? Was that a chance to create a set of new small businesses, giving preference to current sanitation workers? And I could see small, medium-sized businesses in different parts of Barbados. So I think we want diversification. I think that has to come by other sectors growing relative to tourism, not by tourism declining. And I think the state should be on the lookout for opportunities through its procurement or policy to really create new opportunities in that manufacturing and those types of business, those types of areas.
Thank you very much. We're going to take a break, and when we come back, final comments from the panel. Stay with us. And welcome back to Forde Co. In the final few minutes of the program, I'm going to do a round robin of my panel and get final thoughts on what they expect will be in the budget this evening and their thoughts. I'm going to start with you, Derek.
Thank you, Joel, and pleasure to have been here with you and your panel today. Again, everyone won't be happy. I think though the government will be somewhat relieved that they've managed to hear this, but then having a budget, I think every sector and every minister will be called on to tighten their laces as much as possible and spend as little of what you've been voted, and but do as much as you can with that spend. For me, I want to see the continued institutional strengthening of all government departments. And institutional strengthening is of with lots of all resources, including human resources, your finances, your plant, your regulations, policies, procedures, okay, your technologies. So for me, I'm looking to see that medium to long term look at the continued institutional strengthening, thereby the platform is laid where all business can be done from Barbados.
Okay, thank you very much, Derek. And Devron, you, final thoughts.
And thank you so much for having me today as well, and congratulations once more on the show. I, from this budget, I don't expect anything significantly different from what we've been doing before. A cut here, a raise there, a give up here, and what's not. But I think we really need to head in the direction of really having national development plans where all parties are involved in the creation of that plan, and there's a self-funding aspect as well as a continual funding aspect for it, and to ensure that the areas we've all discussed today, energy, the economy, and growth and entrepreneurship, and all of those areas have a set budget, that you have that level of investment, have that level of attention going forward. And I really think that has to be one of the main line items in future budgets, a national development budget that targets specifically the growth of a particular industry or a sector. That is what I would like to see in future budgets, but I don't expect anything, magical coming out of this budget. A cut here and, a giveaway there.
Thank you very much, Devron. Professor Robinson, your final thoughts.
I will evaluate the budget by the extent to which it addresses the challenges that I think Barbados face. I expect the budget to seek to stabilize the public finances. I think there's an urgent need to stabilize the public finances. A deficit of 3.3% is not consistent with stable public finances going forward. So that I will be looking to see how that is dealt with. And also building out the institutional regulatory framework to facilitate private sector-led growth as we go forward and a more efficient public service.
All right, thank you, Professor Robinson. Answer this quickly. One of your colleagues, economist Michael Howard, he's suggesting that severe recession could be on the cards depending upon the outcome of this war. Quickly, do you think the recession is possible? Or are we already there?
And that's why I'm saying, I'm hearing a lot about growth. We all want growth, but I'm not sure where we are that growth can be the priority. Stabilization. When somebody gets hit by a bus, the doctor's first priority is to stabilize the patient, and we may very well be there.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Brathwaite, you next. Your thoughts, final thoughts.
Thanks for having invited me, Jewel. I think that what we're going to see this evening is an astute politician who recognizes the importance of the people, who have come to recognize, as all has all been already said by her, that rising inequality and indebtedness are counterproductive to economic growth and development. So I think you're going to see Ms. Motley marketing herself and marketing her government, wooing the private sector for their continued input and investments. And I see at the same point in time she will be trying to pacify those who would otherwise want to be a counter. So I see it as one of flexibility, nimbleness, because she would have learned those traits from Owen Arthur, and I could see her coming back to the population by the end of the year, given a shortened version of a budget. But at this point in time, I think I am guided by Professor Robinson in saying that stability and not letting the carrot overturn with all the apples is the main priority. And after that, it is ensuring that we are able to maneuver and gravitate the swells that come on the international ocean.
Thank you very much, Dr. Brathwaite. And David, oh dear, Professor Robinson's going to be upset with me again because he can tell me that once again. You get your last word from the lady. You get the last word, David.
I expect a budget that focuses on the pending risk coming out of things related to COVID in terms of reduced global production and the issues with freight and so on, the heightened risk now because of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. But if there's any relief, I would expect that the Prime Minister will offer measured relief that does not conflict with the overall economic objectives of the government, and that even that measured relief may be short term. And for that reason, I support Dr. Brathwaite's call that she may come back to the population in a few months to realign the measures and to make adjustments based on how the global factors pan out in the coming weeks and months. At the end of the day, there's a deficit that needs to be funded. There are IMF targets to be met, but we still have to be able to survive. So hopefully on the other side of that, I would expect and hope that she can lay some of the initial foundations towards the transformational agenda that we've spoken to. And I must say to Devron that we are very aligned on the call for this national development plan and that the budget is based on that, because I think that is how we'll be able to move forward in the medium to long term while we address the short term risks.
Thank you very much, Derek Cummins, President of BIBA and CEO of Amicorp Bank and Trust, Dr. George Brathwaite, political scientist and lecturer at UWI Cave Hill, Professor Justin Robinson, lecturer in financial management at UWI Cave Hill, Devron Bruce, a political scientist, and David Simpson, a chartered accountant general. My sincerest thank yous. It cannot be easy to have dedicated 2 hours to a live show in the middle of the day, so no, I thank you, and I am going to invite you back after the budget so that we can see if the things we talked about actually came to pass in that document. Thank you. I also want to say a special thanks to Nadia Foster, Brittany Brewster, Glenn Reese, and Joshua Hinkson. Programs like this don't just happen, and I needed some research done, and they delivered and in good time. So thank you very much for that. You're watching Forde Co. We preview the budget. Don't forget it's coming to you live this evening at 3 p.m. right here on CBC TV 8. Until then, we take you now to Newsday at 12 noon. Bye-bye.